Thank you for coming. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. First of all, anybody who has a cell phone in their pocket, unless you're responding to fire calls, fire alarms, please put them on mute or turn them off. That would be appreciated. And let me introduce you to the Camden Charter Commission members. I will start over here. Bob Oxton, who's sitting in the audience.
Trying to turn off his
cell phone. And you all can say your name.
Oh, thank you. I'm John French.
Jim Hurd.
Laurie Sargent.
Deb Dodge.
Mark Haskell.
Jean White.
Karen Grove.
And Bill Kelly, is our town attorney, has joined us to help us with anything legal that comes up that we're not sure about.
Hopefully.
After the town voted to create this commission in June of 2019, this group of volunteers started work in the fall of 2019. And in spite of the breadth of our combined experience, including Budget Committee, Select Board, Planning Board, ZBA, Personnel Board, Conservation Commission, Comprehensive Plan, and even the last Charter Commission, in spite of that, we struggled a bit at the beginning on deciding on how to approach a charter that had not been revised or fully reviewed in 40 years. The charter has only had amendments in 2003, 16, and 18, no holistic review. We discovered that it was a bit of a big task to even decide how to proceed. We realized the charter needed modernization, bringing it up to date with current statutes and references. The format needed to be more accessible. Various duties scattered throughout the charter needed consolidation. The first thing we tackled was looking at our form of government. Bill Kelly came to the initial meeting to talk to us about various forms of government in the state of Maine and versions of the town meeting form of government. We also looked at other towns and how they were structured. And as a group, we still believe that the town meeting form of government is the right form of government, right structure for us at this time. That may change. How we govern ourselves may need to change in the future, but we believe that we've drafted a good foundation for the town going forward. Future considerations of any major change in structure will not have to deal with a 40-year-old charter. We've created a new baseline. We looked at how to bring the charter in line with current practices in the administration of the town, financial procedures, including the budget process, endowment fund management, and long-range planning. We also realized we needed to provide a process to make sure another 40 years did not go by before the charter was revisited. COVID certainly created an obstacle for us in the process of moving forward through revision, review, and garnering public input. So here we are tonight, looking forward to questions and feedback. And as we proceed, we'll use a PowerPoint presentation that goes through the highlights of the proposed revisions. Not every minor technical detail, but the highlights of them. And there, if you all picked one up, there are on the chair. There is an outline version of what the same thing that you will see up on the screen. So another thing, in case you all don't know, we have annotated versions of the full draft in the town office for review. There are copies in the public library for review, as well as out on the town website. If you go to the town website, you can go to the boards and committees section. You'll find the Charter Commission, and there you find a link to the annotated version of the draft, highlights of the draft, and an introduction. So with that, we'll start. Highlights of proposed revisions. As I said, the commission was formed in 2019. The purpose was to review and propose revisions to the current charter, which was last revised in 1979. Our elected members are Nancy Cottle Johnson, Mark Haskell, Jim Hurd, Steve Melcheski, Chris McLean, and Robin McIntosh. Steve, Chris, and Robin, all three had to resign due to other complications, things that took their time. Appointed members are myself, Deb Dodge, John French, Lowry. Bob Oxton came in to replace one of the resigned. Karen Grove was appointed, and Jean White was appointed. So that's who we are. The charter of the town of Camden, we are recommending to maintain the town meeting, select board / town manager form of government. Interestingly enough, Camden was the very first town in 1925 to adopt the town manager version of the town meeting, select board form of government. What we considered during our discussions was our option A was to perhaps change the form of government to a hybrid, which would be a town council, town meeting, and town manager. And that means that the town council and the legislative body, which are the voters in a town meeting form of government, would actually share some of the authority for making decisions. Police and miscellaneous ordinance could be approved solely by the select board or town council. The power to change zoning, appropriations, and borrowing would be reserved for the town voters, or all ordinances could be approved solely by the select board. In some of there are like 14 or 15 town council, town meeting, town manager forms of government in the state of Maine, and most of them have the town voters still doing budget and land use ordinance. Some have, the town council have authority for ordinance changes, but not that many. Option A gives the select board / town council more authority to act quickly. The con is the citizens are farther removed from the process. To override any ordinance that may have been passed by a town council, town voters would actually have to go through the petition process. And option B would be, another option would be to give the select board authority to approve additional appropriations or additional borrowing only during declared states of emergency, such as COVID. And we actually, in our Article 6, which is financial procedures, we actually have an emergency appropriations clause that's in the current draft. Before I go any further on that article, are any comments or questions about town meeting form of government and where we are so far? Okay.
We would ask that, we would encourage everyone to speak or ask a question. All we ask is that you come up here and speak into the mic so we can hear you, and you tell us your name and whether or not you're a resident of Camden.
Yeah, we have a sign-up sheet on the podium. One of the sections in Article 1, which is town meetings and warrants, and one of the new things that we have added is to have all ordinance reviewed by our town attorney, including any petitions that are going on the warrant or any articles that are going on the warrant that have come through by petition. And the purpose of that is to make sure, not to change the substance of what the petition is saying, but to make sure there aren't any conflicts with Maine statutes, Constitution, that the wording makes sense. And so we are not suggesting, we are recommending that all warrant articles be reviewed by the town attorney before they're placed on the ballot. Section 2 is composition and that's the select board, sorry. That was it on powers of the town, Article 1. Any questions? Yes, Allison.
My name's Allison McKellar, and
Would you write it down? Just we need it for the public.
Oh, sure, yeah.
To have a written record.
and yes, I'm a Camden resident. With the town attorney review, what does review mean? Does review mean reads it and then endorses it,
It's not-
or
it's not.
provides an opinion that's available to the public, or?
It states, all proposed town ordinances and articles shall be examined by the town attorney before being submitted to the voters. The town attorney is authorized to correct the form of a proposed ordinance or article for the purpose of avoiding repetitions, illegality, and unconstitutional provisions, and to assure accuracy in its text and references, and clarity and preciseness in its phraseology. Any such correction shall not substantially change its meaning and effect.
So I guess I've seen a lot, and I haven't seen it happen as much in Camden since I've been paying attention, but when I read news articles about other towns, and it seems like that turns into sometimes and first of all, I don't have necessarily an opinion about this. I'm just trying to understand like how it would practically work. Most of the time, I think that sort of happens anyway.
It is not necessarily stated.
But maybe it gets used as a tool. There's a political question sometimes as to whether or not to just put the petition out to voters and let them vote on it, even if, put the question out to voters, even if the town attorney says, well, this might conflict with Maine state statute. And then the select board might say, well, we're not going to put it out there because we can't guarantee that it complies with state law. And I think sometimes I've seen residents then say, well, you should still give people the chance to vote on that. And if the town wants to enact something that conflicts with state law later, I guess town attorneys can find a problem with many things. And I wonder if it's putting there's a difference between review and endorsing. Having seen many ordinances go to Bill for some comment, and then sometimes it gets kicked back for various reasons.
This is not for endorsement purposes, and I'll let.
Do you think it's a problem that we have in Camden right now that ordinances get passed without, I guess, what problem are we trying to solve?
We're trying to avoid having an issue. I remember a number of years ago, a petition being circulated throughout the town where the petition didn't match what the actual proposed ordinance stated, and something like that would possibly be caught ahead of time by the town attorney, that you don't want people signing a petition for something that doesn't also match what the ordinance says. So having a town attorney review things that are coming through even by petition could avoid that. In that case, the people that were having the petition drive had to redo the petition and get signatures all over.
You're saying before
It's presented.
Oh.
You don't.
Okay,
that
wasn't
If that
clear
had
to me.
gone through, it would have been invalid because everybody would have signed to put this on the warrant, and it didn't match. But
I thought you were saying after it comes back, before the select board puts it on. Okay, no, that makes lots of sense to
Before
me.
it's presented.
Okay.
And one of
No,
the
that's
things
good. No,
we're
I
trying
see,
to
we
do,
definitely see
too,
that happen.
is to take, there's a lot of stuff that's been common practice, or we usually do it this way, and we're trying to make that part of the charter. If that's the way we always do it, then it should say in the charter that that's one of the steps you follow. Not just on this, but other things. Because there's always a turnover of personnel, and we want to try to make sure that there's some kind of institutional consistency in how things are handled.
John, go ahead.
Well, I think I recall the one you're talking about. In fact, Bill had to work with the petitioners to make sure that what they were writing was, one, legal, and that the town could defend it if it won. And also, if I recall, there was also a competing article running at the same time, wasn't at that time. So we had to make sure that the townspeople didn't vote in two of the same articles.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's the reason for this, is just a review from the attorney to make sure, one, the town can defend it if it does pass, and it is legal and constitutional.
So it's it's more of a common sense process to go through. He probably does that anyway, but there isn't anything that says, gee, we ought to have that happen.
Right, it doesn't happen, I don't think. A lot of the time, it's kind of like it seems like it doesn't happen. I don't know. I wouldn't want Bill to have to sit around all the time and just be giving legal advice to every group that wants to come and start a petition against the town, but, okay, that clarifies things
I
a
might
little
just
bit.
phrase it this way, John's point and Deb's, I've
Oh,
tried.
shoot, I forgot to turn the video thing to this whole group. It's still on the PowerPoint
That's okay.
presentation.
They can hear us, hopefully.
They can, yes.
One of the things I've tried to do when we know something is being filed is just what was discussed, is to look at it beforehand so we don't play gotcha. So I see something, it's a problem, I don't say anything. We wait till it's all voted on, and then I say, guess what? So a little early
I can
intervention
totally see that.
has
Yeah.
been helpful.
Yeah, that's seems fair. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Two.
Article 2 in the charter is all about the select board. How they get elected, how they're qualified, what their powers are. And we are proposing some changes to that in composition and eligibility. Currently, No other town employee can be a member of the select board, but in our early discussions, there's a thought of our firefighters. We need to encourage firefighters, and we want to encourage select board members, and our thought was, let's not exclude our part-time firefighters from being eligible to be a select board member. So the PRO expands the pool for both the fire department and the select board. And on terms, currently we have no term limit. Even though this really isn't a limit, we are suggesting three-year terms, and then taking a year off before coming back and running for a fourth term. Our rationale was we believed it would encourage new people to run for office. The con is it really an issue? Is our problem really finding people to serve so would that restrict us because people would only be serving 3 years and a year off?
3 terms.
3 terms, I'm
Which
sorry.
would be 9 years.
Three-year terms.
9
Thank you.
years.
And then we've expanded the section on forfeiture of office and notification of forfeiture. We really haven't had a standard for that, and we tried to not make it terribly long and detailed, but we have gone with 3 unexcused absences within 6 months. Form of forfeiture if you are not attending and not participating in the select board meetings. It ensures commitment to the responsibility of serving. It does include considerations for excused absence, and it allows for the replacement of a non-participating member. The con is, in some discussion, it was thought, well, should the select chair just be the one to try to handle any chronic absenteeism? And, that's a couple of things. Does anybody have any questions that they want to bring up on those things before we go on? Yes, Mark, come on up.
Go in here. My name is Mark Ratner, and I'm a resident of Camden. Deb and I had a long conversation about the term limit issue yesterday, and I feel awkward discussing it because if it's put into effect, there's a possibility the next person it would affect would be myself. That is, right now I'm nearing the end of my second term. I've not made a total decision yet whether I'll run for a third term. I think I may. I haven't even thought about a fourth term. But my problem with the term limit, there are a couple of things. Deb mentioned that, is it a problem? And I think and I think Mr. French will be able to help me, has there anybody besides yourself ever held 4 terms, up 4
Bill
terms?
Hodson, right? Bill Hodson,
So 2 people in the last,
that I remember. It was like more than that.
so 2 people in the last 30 years, maybe?
Probably 50.
50 years? So,
More than 50?
More than 2 people.
Yeah, Bill was, then he became town manager, right? And then he went back on the board after that.
so there've been a few people. So it's one of the problems we have is finding people, and I've seen it in other towns. It's harder to find people to volunteer for government, for volunteer positions now than it's ever been because people are busier. I've known that. I've been involved in volunteer search and rescue work for, 30 plus years, and I've seen that happen in the last 30 years. The people's availability to volunteer has really been cut back. This last couple elections, we had a number of people running for election, but the time before, when John was stepped down from the board, he was prepared to go on the last day of nominations were available because there was an open seat. And somebody signed up, Taylor Benzie signed up on the last day available. But otherwise we would have had perhaps an open seat. My biggest problem with it is term limits are fine if you want to do it. I don't think it's a problem. My problem is with if you want to do a fourth term, you need to take a year off. And my problem with that is one of the important things about a select board is the ability for the people to work well together. And I think that's important as you start, when you first join the board, it takes a while to get to know each other. But after, 3 or 4 years, if people keep running, it's can be a smooth running operation. It can really do good things for the town. The problem is that by asking somebody to take, well, if you want to do a fourth term, you need to take a year off. You have two problems. One, you lose institutional memory. And that's important. One of the things, and I'll say this about John, watching John from in the audience, sometimes you wondered about him. But working with him, it's the truth. Yeah, but it's the truth. But once you work with him and you start to get into the depth of his knowledge and what he knows, the respect, my respect for him just grew tremendously. And I needed to understand the job and understand how it was done before I could really make have a valuable opinion about the job that he was doing. And his knowledge of everything that happened in the town for those, 21 years is so valuable that often current select board members still go by the garage to ask him about what about this, what about that, because we need that knowledge. The problem is if you're running, say he takes a year off and he's got a really solid board. Let's take the commission right now. Let's say that Lowry has been on the commission, or let's say this is the select board, and Lowry's been on the commission for 3 terms, wants to run more, he enjoys the job, he does a great job, and he wants to take a year off. So he takes a year off, and that next year, the person running for the position is Deb. So all of a sudden, Lowry has to run against somebody he's worked really well with for years and years, and that's not a good situation. You're all of a sudden putting people that have worked well together against each other. And I think that's not a good position to be in. I'd rather see, if you want to do 3 terms, do 3 terms, but don't say then you can run again after a year, because then you tend to put people that have worked well together against each other, and that would maybe create Deb from running again or create Lowry from running again when we could use both of them. And I think that's a problem. I think you're working to solve a problem that doesn't exist, and I think you're doing it in a way that could hurt the town.
Thank you. Yes, John.
I agree with Mark. You know that. I've said that from the beginning. But the other thing, Mark, when you said about institutional memory and all that, when I left the board, you were the senior member with 2 years service. Jenna and Taylor just got elected, and Bob and Allison had only been on a year at that time. So, I mean, that was a complete, so that could have happened. That's without term limits. So, I mean, we've been lucky, though. We've had, every election I recall, we've had at least, I think the one you ran by yourself one time, right, Karen?
I did.
Right, but
And
most of the time.
One time there were 2 openings, you and I ran.
But
and were
most of the
elected.
time is 3 or 4 folks that are running
And then
for
the
the
last
positions.
time I ran, there was an open seat and nobody had signed up for it. And so I put my papers in, I walked out the door and somebody went in the front door and put their papers in. I was like, oh, okay.
That's one thing that I always hated the idea of an open seat, because that's somebody, if they win it, they're winning it because somebody wrote 2 signatures or whatever it is at a town meeting, and they may not have wanted to do it. I mean, if you're going to want to do it, put your name down, get your petition going, run it and go. Because, I mean, that's what it's all about. And you all do a great job. There's 3 of them here right now, and 3 former here, right here now. 4, excuse me, Jim.
1, 2, 3,
But,
4.
I'm not a fan of this either, so, but I'll go in with the group.
Well, no, it's good to hear that. Allison? Do you need to do anything?
Thank you. I've learned my lesson.
Oh, okay, figured it
The
out.
right way now. Yeah, I agree with Mark and John on this one. I don't see it as a problem when John's sort of like the example of that in recent memory. And was it really, even though John and I didn't agree on everything, as a citizen that came in just sort of paying attention from the outside a little bit. I was on a committee. I started paying attention to town government. It was probably something that I was angry about to begin with. Like a lot of people come, because they're angry and then they start paying attention. And I found that John was, a really good chair. He was really good. I ended up begging him to be the chair of Midco Solid Waste at one point, not because we agreed on every little issue, but because the years of experience had made him good at dealing with things. And I can't see how Camden would have been any better off to have forced John off the board. And shouldn't be all about like a personal, but that is the example for us. And I think if anything, there should be maybe term limits or more limits with turnover on the budget committee. Then, and is this the right section to talk about the budget committee? No, not yet. Okay.
That's similar.
So
That's Article 6.
yeah, I just with term, we have a hard enough time getting people to do this, and we don't have an issue of there aren't so many benefits to the position that, and there is a learning curve,
Yes.
and I don't know. So I just can't, I would curious what I didn't see the conversation that happened that led the group to come to this recommendation. Is there, what am I missing?
Nothing.
No. Okay.
No, you got it.
I mean, the only thing I could think of that would be good from it is that if you know that you can only serve 9 years total, that it might create a sense of urgency to accomplish things that can sometimes, if you think you have all the time in the world, then things can drone on, but that maybe it's good could be good in that way, because you can become sort of lackadaisical and.
Wait a minute, there's no 9-year limitation. You can serve 9 years, take a year off, serve 9 more years, take a year off, serve 9 more years.
It just seems so silly, though, because it's kind of like just before you have another drink, just take a walk around the block, and then, I mean, what is that? To think, get out in the real world and.
Term limits.
What's that?
There have been other committees with term limits over time. Okay.
And there are some other towns that do this. One town has three-year terms and 3 years off before you can do it again, which might solve the problem of competition. Mark, you had your hand up.
Yes, I agree with most of what's being said here, but from a slightly different perspective, locally it's not an issue, but it could be. We've looked at state and national politics, and we get people who get in and they're there for life. And I'm not sure that's a good thing. I'm not sure that's going to happen here. I don't think it's going to happen on this level, but that's part of the reasoning for why there is a term limit.
I just think that
I don't think it's going to happen here, but having some mechanism in there that does make people make a choice at some point in time, rather than you get, the old boy in and he's there for 47 years. Okay,
But if people keep voting for that person, then, I don't know, I just think that we should trust the vote. If this is all, a lot of what I've seen with the trend of the Charter Commission is to sort of reinforce the idea of the voters as the legislative body, the voters as the ultimate decider. And I think that if we do that, we should be consistent, and we should trust the voters, and trust the voters to choose the select board. The select board has very little power to begin with. So if all the select board is doing is choosing what goes before voters, and then the voters, I just don't know why we wouldn't trust the voters in that sense. And that also, just the last thing is that there is a tendency, I think, that we're often fighting the tendency to think about town government through the same lens that we think about national politics, and things are just so different at this level that I just think we should resist some of those same fears kind of creeping into our documents. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, one more thing.
Two more things really quickly. In terms of, in recent history, we have had serving members be defeated at the ballot. There's not the kind of money and politics involved at this level. And one of the great things about it is there is no right and left. There is no parties at this level. So you don't get that institutional kind of craziness that's going on both sides. So I don't think it's a problem. And the really important thing here is John is hoping for somebody to serve 8 terms instead of his 7, so they can get their name on the room and he can take his picture and name off the
Take
wall.
his picture down.
Thank you. Karen, did you want to add something?
Yes, I just wanted to say that I fully agree with John and Mark about not going for term limitations. The institutional memory is probably one of the most important things that we have with people that serve a long time, like John. We keep going back to you. I'm sorry, we don't want to put you on the spot. But there was a person that was signing up to run for select board, who is on the current select board, and asked me what I thought about select board work and all of that. And the very first thing I said to him is, talk to people that have institutional memory, former select board members, about what they know, what they see. Go out there and talk to the people who've been around here for a long time. You don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel, but you do have to listen to that memory because it will serve you well. So I agree with you, Mark.
Thank you. We'll move on. We talked a bit about the forfeiture, which we expanded. There are state laws about what you could do to need to forfeit your office, but this is just sort of expanding and adding a reason to forfeit your office if you have unexcused absences.
Yep.
Yeah.
Question, before you get too far into this.
Yeah.
Now, this is opposition to what we propose.
Yeah.
How does that get presented going forward? Is it someone, as just in the minutes, that the folks in the room disagreed with what was presented, or I just was curious how that was
Right,
going?
and then we have a meeting scheduled for August 5th of the
Yeah.
Charter Commission to get together after we've had this session to talk about the feedback that we get. And then we have another meeting on August 18th, and we put that feedback together, and we can make the decision to make alterations.
Okay.
If we wish to, if we feel that way. I mean, that's part of why we have this public feedback, is to say, do we need to change course on one or two things as a result of some of the feedback we've gotten from people? So we'll do that on August 5th, and then we'll have an August 18th meeting, and we'll do it again right after that.
Thank you.
So it won't just go in the minutes, we'll actually
Well, I
talk
want
about it.
everybody
We
to be
won't talk
sure.
about it tonight because we have a fair amount to cover.
But I want everybody to be sure, too, that they were being heard.
Absolutely. Yes, Allison, is it on something new?
It's
Okay.
the forfeiture of office.
Okay.
It's the-
Well, let's finish this section and
Let's-
then take comments on any remaining part of section 2. rather
Well,
than-
she's going to do forfeiture. You want me to just keep going through the rest of 2?
Yeah, otherwise,
Okay.
it's going to be 2.10 and 2.11 and 2.12 and.
Okey-doke. 2.11 is the enumeration of powers and responsibilities. We just sort of renamed that. But what we have added is guidelines for establishing committees. There really hasn't been anything in the charter that said, if the select board wants to establish a committee, there should be a committee directive, there should be a liaison appointed. So we're putting that in the charter because although the power to appoint is in the charter, there aren't any sort of guidelines around what a charter, how the committee should be set up, including a directive. That's not, that kind of direction is not in the charter. And then in the enumeration of powers and responsibilities, we've added that the select board every 5 years should take a look to see if there is a need to have revision to the charter. This is the section I talked about, so we don't go 40 more years before the select board says, gee whiz, should we take a look at our charter to see if it's working for the town and if we need to make changes. So they can decide, they can decide that, gee, we just have a few amendments to do. Yes, we need to do a revision, or no, we don't. It's just in the charter for them to know that is something that they should be looking at on a more regular basis than every 40 years. And under procedures for select board meetings, the current charter talks about 3/5 of the membership votes to do things, and we just felt like that could be confusing, particularly if 4 people are there. What is 3/5? If there are 4 people there and you need to go do an executive session, So we just said 3 members in the affirmative, which is 3/5, but we just thought from a layman's point of view of looking at it, 3 made more sense than 3/5. And that was it on section 2. So Allison, you had something on forfeiture?
Or the excused absences, and I'm sorry if this is written in detail somewhere, but what's going to be the process for determining whether an absence is excused or unexcused?
It's in the section that says forfeiture of notice and notification of forfeiture. And C says fails to attend 3 regular meetings in any 6-month period without being excused by the select board. An absence shall be excused by a majority vote of the select board. Factors to be considered shall include, but not limited to, attendance records, circumstances beyond control of the absent member, professional or family commitments, illness or medical treatments. So it's saying, here's some reasons that you would certainly consider as an excused absence. No shows is not an excused absence.
It just seems like that now means that anytime somebody is absent, it's going to force us to go through the process of determining whether it's an excused absence or an unexcused absence.
Yeah?
And that just seems
That's,
a little bit awkward. I mean, maybe unnecessary. And I mean, I can think of the examples that have come up. It's usually medical or
That's
death, but it's often private. And I'm just it's very often a private matter. And so I'm just trying to think about how that's going to happen. We're all going to be like, well, Bob's not here. We all kind of know what that's about. Excused. Or are we going to say it out loud? Are we going to say, well, Bob tonight is not here because of a doctor's appointment, so we voted.
No, you wouldn't say that.
But how are we going to, it's going to have to be recorded. We're going to have to keep, if it's a rule, then we're going to have to keep track of it somehow.
Well, don't you?
we'll just say excuse, that's it.
So then we all have to know why.
No,
No.
no. You have to trust each other enough to know that if you decide one night that you cannot go because illness to you, one of your children, whatever, as long as you hey, can't make it that night because of. It could not, you may not even determine it until the day of.
In an email or a.
To the chair.
To the chair, yeah.
Usually it works the way I've seen a lot of private situations come up, and there are things that I don't think it's appropriate to force all select board members to future select board members to have to share their reason for being absent with, again, don't see it as a
Contact with the
huge.
chair, that's all it takes.
And then the chair, but if everybody has to vote by majority on whether the absence is excused or not, just practically, my issue is practically, how is this going
It's
to go?
not saying that everybody has to vote.
Well, it says excused by a majority vote. We went through a number of iterations of this and tried to keep it simpler. John, you wanted to?
Well, the biggest thing was, as you're aware of, if somebody doesn't show up for several meetings in a row, and you're working on something, all of a sudden you either can't vote on it because you don't have enough votes, or you table it because you want everybody on board to, if it's a controversial issue in the town, to vote on it. And so that things just kind of linger on because somebody's not showing up.
I think I would rather have somebody not, I guess I haven't been doing it long enough to have seen the
There's been issues,
situation,
but not that many. But
I'd rather not force somebody on, I don't know.
Give
Somebody
you
doesn't want to be
a
here.
couple examples. In a number of the towns we looked at, it's at the sole discretion of the chairman of the select board to whether or not an absence is excused.
I guess I'd be more comfortable with that.
Well, we felt that that put too much power, too much pressure on the chair. That was our feeling, okay? We talked about that was our feeling. Let me give you an example from the planning board. This is years ago, 10 years ago maybe. we had a member who was very sick and missed, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months in a row. We didn't have any ability to replace that person.
But there are alternates.
We didn't have alternates.
There was a time when
There was a
Person
time,
refused
there was
to
a
meet
time
on the
the
planning
planning
board.
board had 3 people for a number of months, and we didn't have any ability to replace that person because they were still a member, even though
They refused to
they were
resign.
unable to participate because of a medical situation. It was a very unfortunate situation, but it does happen.
Where the person didn't want to resign for some reason?
They were unwilling to. And we didn't, I mean, that mechanism just didn't exist. I mean, we discussed this with Bill and kind of said, what do we do? And it was a problem. And it could certainly happen to any group.
Right,
But
okay.
the select board is a pretty important group in town. You know, we want to, as citizens, as taxpayers, we want to have a full complement of select board members as often as possible, fully engaged in the task.
I think it would be, if you want to provide some kind of a legal mechanism for a situation like this, I would think it would be less awkward and just easier if it were the chairperson, because the chairperson gets just chosen by the select board, and it would just eliminate the awkwardness of needing to vote. I mean, we're literally saying, you know, so-and-so's not here, so there would, in this, the way it's written, there would have to be a vote every time, and it just seems a little bit cumbersome, so.
It's interesting, most of the communities' charters that we looked at have a mechanism for unexcused absences, you know, whatever the number is. I can't tell you off the top of my head how many of them have the select board vote versus it just being notification to the chair, but
I can
most
see
of the
what you're
towns we
saying,
looked
yeah.
at have a clause like this. Bill, we had some conversations about this, didn't we? And one of the things I think you did was you suggested we trim down what all those reasons were to make it.
Right, well, keep in mind, it's a sort of a constitutional document. It's not intended to be like an ordinance. All the questions that you're asking are, you know, valid questions, but the document's written in a way that the board at the time is going to have to apply general concepts. I would look at it this way. Before someone is removed from being on the select board for unexcused absences, practically speaking, there's going to have to be a hearing, because there's still due process that applies to removing somebody from an office.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't really present itself until you're asking the question of who's going to decide what is excused and what isn't excused.
I'm not that concerned about getting to the actual point where that's not the part. I can see what Larry's saying with there might come a time when you need this thing to happen. I'm not so concerned about somebody getting kicked off the select board sort of in an unfair way. I'm more concerned about the process, like an arduous process of, I basically don't want to have to go through reviewing reasons for people being absent from select board meetings. I would be more comfortable with it being just the chair. And it just seems like if we create too many things in the charter that are too arduous, it lends itself to being ignored. I mean,
Well, I'm not sure what we've written sounds arduous. There aren't 15 steps here.
but will we vote in a public meeting, in an open session, every select board meeting on the reasons for, whether, so every time somebody's absent, will we say, and now we need to vote on whether so-and-so's absence is excused or not?
No. 3 regular meetings failed to attend in a 6-month period. It's not
There've
every
been
single
three- if
time
there've been
somebody's
three-
absent.
Go back and then say on this date and this date and this date, what were the reasons?
Now, if a member's not going to be able to attend for whatever reason, they have an obligation to let the chair know. Hey, I can't make it tomorrow night. My mother died. The tires fell off my car. I've got the flu, whatever it is. They have an obligation to let the chairman know. They can't just
Then
not,
that- yeah,
just
that-
not show up,
Right.
okay? What it says, as to back up what Karen said, is if this happens 3 times in a 6-month period, either somebody's really unlucky or it's starting to become a problem.
I get it, but I'm just trying, we
We're
might not
trying
be
to figure
arguing.
out how it would work in
Do
practical
we go,
situations.
that's really all I'm saying. Do we then, when it becomes a problem, do we then go back and say, on this date it was this, on this date it was this, and on this date it was this, and were those excused or unexcused? Or are we doing this preemptively? Are we keeping track as we go of whether the absence is excused or unexcused? Or are we only going back and reviewing once it has triggered the 3 number?
That's not exactly what this says. This actually says, without being excused by the select board, an absence shall be excused by a majority vote of the select board. So that is 1 by 1. And I see what you're saying, and I understand about the privacy thing.
And I think in some ways that almost makes more sense, rather than voting each time, because what we're saying after 3.
A pattern, if there's a pattern of,
Then you do something, and I think what you need to do, whoever's the chair, maybe make a note somewhere, in a notebook or whatever, make a note somewhere that so-and-so is absent, or even in the minutes it's absent, you don't have to say what, but somewhere someone can make a note, and the chair certainly could do that and have a record of that.
Could we just, is there a mechanism to leave it to the discretion of the select board? So if it triggers if the select board says, you know what, I'd like to request a review of this, or I believe that this has become an issue, and just to make it because I see what you're trying to do, but just to.
do it in a less awkward way.
Right, like to not make it an automatic thing or, because.
Well, the problem with that is, goes back to a little bit of what Mark was talking about. What if you have to sit out a year and then run against a friend? You know, if the select board is this homogeneous group that works hard together to accomplish things, and all of a sudden somebody or some buddies basically have to say, so-and-so hasn't been here regularly, I think we should discuss this, then that really puts them in a difficult situation. And I think that's one of the reasons is why we have rules, is so you can look at it and say, well, the rules say that this is how we should handle this, not I feel that this person should have attended and they didn't.
So you want it to be like we're almost protecting the voters from the select board, and like you don't even trust the select board to decide whether it's become an issue or not? Like you want them off automatically if it's.
No, I don't think
What's
that's-
going to happen is probably you're doing this right now. Whoever is on the select board, if you know for whatever reason you can't attend, you call town office, you tell Audra, you tell the secretary of the
happens just
office,
fine.
you tell the chairman, I'm not going to make it because. And unless it's some crazy reason that they wouldn't accept, they're just going to say, okay, fine, it's going to go that you're absent that night, and the rest of the board knows you're absent. Now,
Theoretic, I mean, but that's not really the way it's written.
you can call, contact it in, let them know, and unless it becomes, this is the 3rd time in the last month she's called in, she can't come in because she's eating ice cream, okay? That's totally.
It's just something that like you guys could talk about a little more.
We actually have done a number of versions of this, and one of the versions was that it's reported to the chair of the select board, and the chair made the decision whether it's excused or not.
Yeah.
Seems fine to me.
That was one of the versions we had before we came up with this one. So that's something
That
we could
seems
certainly we could certainly address again, since it seems to be an issue for you. Yeah.
Hi. First thing is, you probably don't remember it. There used to be in the front page of almost of the town report.
It's
was
in the charter that
attendance-
it's supposed to be.
Yeah, it was the attendance of the select board for the whole year.
Yes.
That was the mechanism, and we haven't been doing
I
it.
don't know how it went away. It went away during my watch, but I don't know when and where it just went.
And I think about that every year, like that needs to, because I liked that personally.
Yeah,
That
and
that was the way to sort of alert the voters, and if they believe it's a concern, because I do think that attendance is not the sole decider of how effective somebody is. I do believe attendance is very important, but I liked that. I like what it says in the charter now. It should be printed. It should be made very clear. All the voters should know. So maybe if we could, it's easy to ignore the charter.
Then they're held accountable by the voters. But in the meantime, as you said, if it's happening during the year and somebody's chronically not there, it's hampering what the select board can do, which is the reason for this. And whether this mechanism is perfect or not yet.
But the thing is, I think the chair should handle it, period. And I do agree with that, but there needs to be a mechanism, so if it gets to be 4 in a row, that, the chair obviously should take whoever it is aside, say, is there a problem, why you're not attending? And they could say it's obligations, whatever. you know, and that's it, between the chair and the person that is involved. And if it gets to be a problem after the third or fourth time, and the chair spoke to him, then it needs to be addressed.
I believe that it's your right to find a little mechanism in there,
Yeah.
so that if the board were to decide, we really need, this person skipped town and just went away, and we just need another member, that I like that you're creating a little legal mechanism, just maybe
Well,
the
if you
method.
skip town, you're not a board member anyway anymore, if you're not a resident.
How do you decide? Doesn't you have to have a hearing to decide that somebody's not a resident anymore, or it's hard to prove somebody's not a resident? And
Yeah, 'cause you have to establish residency somewhere
Anyway,
else.
thank you, Allison. Okey doke.
You can't be a non-resident of anywhere.
All right, I think
Whoa, who served that wasn't in town?
maybe it was on the planning board.
It was not a requirement, it's not a planning board requirement, that's why we put it in this year.
the charter currently says that one member of the select board can be a part-time employee of the town. So to me, what you framed it as though you were adding flexibility, but I think you're actually taking it away, because right now it doesn't restrict it to being a member of the fire department. It can be, one member of the select board can be a part-time employee of the town of Camden,
That's
is what
in
it
there
says
as
now.
well, I think, isn't it?
That's how it's been for years.
Right, but if now you're going to, I don't know if it's wise to restrict, I think it works fine the way it is.
Well, you get a conflict if you got a town employee that's a select board.
Yeah, it's about the town employees.
Right, but there's, the fire department can have conflicts too,
True, but I mean,
believe it or not.
No, that does say that.
So I don't know why I would be careful about just like singling out the fire department as some like
it's been
special
singled out like that
category.
for, what, 20 years? That's been in there?
It doesn't say that,
Requirement?
it
Well,
doesn't,
it was, I can't remember how it got put in there, but it's been the way it's been.
the charter doesn't restrict it to the part-time employee being a
He's
firefighter.
got it.
Section 9.
Jean, what's the current language say?
Holding other
Officer of the
office.
fire department cannot be a selectman.
That's probably,
It has to be a part-time volunteer. There are no more volunteers that call people down there. Because,
yeah, I mean, I get it.
but at one time, there was 40-odd firemen down there.
Oh,
I think you can hear him.
People can't hear me?
the way our microphones work. Maybe you could just come up and stand next to me. I just want people want to be able to hear this.
What I would like to have is Jean read what's currently there.
Okay, holding other office. No member of the select board shall serve as an employee of the town, except that only one member of the select board may serve in any 1 year, who is also a part-time employee of the town of Camden.
1 year.
A part-time employee shall be an employee who regularly works less than 20 hours a week and who is not salaried.
I mean, I don't think it's perfect the way it is. It was just that you said it's a little different than how it's framed. And maybe you would consider that there might be other temporary times when it would be in the best interest of the town to, I don't know what the reason was for them putting that in the first place. I bet it was some specific.
Well, having a full-time employee be on the select board is a conflict. Is that what
I
you mean?
totally agree. And some might say that a part-time employee shouldn't be on there either, because it most certainly is a conflict, because you get to vote on everything from the personnel policy to the,
Budget,
to the budget and all.
Benefits.
Right.
That go on the.
So
into the budget.
so
So that's probably, well,
right, I don't know
great
if
point.
we need that you've created a special category for firefighters. If we're going to do that, there are also, the fire department is not the only area where the town has lots of problems, sometimes recruiting people. And the Knox County Commissioners just got themselves in a big issue by, singling out sort of one group.
I will certainly let Bill give us some counsel on that.
Words of wisdom.
Thank you.
All right.
Okey doke. Article 3, Town Manager. We really didn't change anything, other than, at the suggestion of Roger Moody, who came to one of our early meetings. For those of you who don't know, Roger's former town manager. He came to one of our meetings. He said, there are a lot of duties sprinkled throughout this charter, and it might be a good idea where it makes the most sense to put them all together. So that's basically what we did, with the exception of sort of a wastewater department, because that's a whole different category. So what we did is reorganize the presentation of the duties and tried to put them all under the town manager, so a town manager wouldn't have to go hunt and peck through a charter. Are there any questions about that? Comments? Okay, Article 4, which is administrative organization, and here again, this is where we took a look at that our article in our current charter had things that seemed to really belong under the powers and duties of the select board or the town manager. So we took that section, and those things that didn't seem to belong as orphans in this title that just said general, put them where that made much more sense. So we moved things to the select board, we moved things to the town manager. One of them was out of date, and there was a financial section about bonds, and we moved that into the section on financial procedures, because why have a bond thing sitting all by itself in general when it could be with everything else that has to do with financial procedures? And Section B was the personnel and the personnel board. And we did a major overhaul here. Looking back at the 1979 charter, one of the things the 1979 charter did was to create basically a personnel board and a long list of duties and responsibilities. And over time, that committee has really evolved into an advisory group, because what they did was create the new, what we have as the employee policy manual. They created all of the personnel guidelines that govern the town that our town manager administers as the personnel manager. So they have actually evolved into more of an advisory committee, because the list of 7 or 8 duties that are in the current charter, they've already accomplished by creating a policy manual. So the personnel board actually rewrote a description of what their duties are, and we are recommending that the board transition to an advisory committee and to use the actually sort of the description of what they do as their committee directive, and they wrote this themselves, and that will be part of our recommendation, and in the transition section adding this, so the select board could then use this as creating the directive for the advisory committee. We also provide for a transition. Anybody who is currently serving as an elected member of the personnel board after the adoption of this charter would serve through their term. We wouldn't abruptly say, you're out of here. They would serve to the end of their term, and then the select board would be appointing replacements to the personnel advisory committee. So as I said, it clarifies their role as supportive and advisory to the select board and the town manager as the personnel director. The change is, and that the personnel committees would no longer be elected by the voters, because it would no longer be a board enshrined in the charter. It would be an advisory committee as it's actually operating now. And there was a section in there describing exempt positions and specially classified positions, and we really believe that belongs in the policy manual, because labor laws change on a regular basis, federal or state, and if a change happens in those positions, our charter is out of date. So put that in the policy manual rather than having it in the charter. So those are our recommendations on the administrative Article 4. Any comments or questions?
Good job.
Wastewater department. There's not a lot to talk about in the wastewater department. It's pretty well described in the current charter, and the major thing that we have done is we added a funding mechanism, an option for more funding for capital improvements to include user service charges. This is something we've been voting on annually, almost annually at town meeting, and we thought of putting it in the charter would keep it from having to be voted on whenever it was necessary. It's an option that's out there. for the wastewater commissioners. And any questions or thoughts about that? Six, financial procedures. Sort of the first thing we did was take the current article and put it in sort of chronological order to some degree, because it really didn't follow the budget process as you do it. So it's a little more logical, it's easier to follow and read. And then we made a recommendation for a major change to the budget committee to eliminate the budget nominating committee altogether and allow interested members to submit an interest form to be put on the ballot. One of the reasons is a number of us have had experience where all of a sudden 3 or 2 days before a town meeting realized that the budget nominating committee never met and never nominated anybody, and we're stuck there with no nominating committee and no new slate. And things like that have happened a number of times. And so I go through that process of finding 3 days before town meeting that you have to call up people to say, will you help find somebody to run on the budget committee? So we think it eliminates the pulling of teeth to assemble and elect a budget nominating committee, because that's hard to do. And as I said, the prospective people who want to serve on the budget committee it'll be advertised that there are vacancies on the budget committee, and people can come in and fill out an interest form. Also, rather than having to go through the petition process since there isn't a nominating committee anymore. We are recommending that we reduce the number of members from, it's currently 21 to 25, to 9 regular and 2 alternate members for a total of 11. This also keeps us from having to try to find so many people, because there is turnover. Many times people don't serve their full term on the budget committee as well. And we actually are the only town in Maine with such a large budget committee. Most have 7 to 9, and most of them are appointed by the select board or town council, not even elected. So we sort of felt like we weren't doing this in the dark, that there was lots of precedents out there in town meeting forms of government where people do it this way. The con is it reduces the number of citizens that review the proposed budget prior to public hearing of the select board and the placement on the warrant by the select board. Interestingly enough, just a sidelight, Bar Harbor, who has a hybrid, they have a town council, town meeting form of government. They have a 17-member warrant review committee, and having communicated with the town manager of Bar Harbor, he said they have a very similar experience of finding it extremely difficult to get actually a 22-member warrant review committee to get people to show up and to be on that committee, and he thinks their number is way too high. But they only meet once, unlike our budget committee, which meets at least 4 times to prepare the budget, or 5 times. They only meet once, and they have a difficulty getting them any. So that was the other thing that told us that we weren't necessarily out in left field with considering doing this. So we continue to, let's see, that's in still thing. Election by secret ballot, filling in regular vacancies, starting with those receiving the highest votes. So if you have 3 people who have filled out interest forms and you've got vacancies, the people who have the highest number of votes get to fill those slots first. And then we've added terms for the budget committee. We are saying that budget committee members may serve up to 3 3-year terms. Here again, we do feel like if we're reducing the number of people on the budget committee, having that institutional memory of people who have served more than one time is a good idea. You cannot currently serve consecutive terms on the budget committee. So this is to encourage people to stay and to have that institutional memory. So it allows for the smaller committee to take advantage of institutional memory of experienced members and lessens the need to search for new members. And some may say that's not enough fresh points of view or not enough eyes on it. I think I'm going to take a break there before I go on to the town vote on the budget. Is there anybody else, before I let you go first, Allison, since you've been going first the whole time, is there anybody else that wants to address this? Because you're also doing double duty as our video person.
Oh, yes, that's regarding the extra points that actually take place later.
Anybody else want to speak to this? Okay, Allison, come on up. No.
I'm happy to let other people go first.
Well, no one else has raised their hand.
So as they say, come on down.
All right. I am so strongly opposed to this change. And I understand why, if the purpose, I think it comes down to the purpose of the Budget Committee, and maybe a difference of opinions about what the intended purpose was versus what the actual purpose has been. In the history of this in Camden is that it used to be called, the name of it to begin with was the Committee of 21. And there's committees of 21 are a thing that happened throughout the world. They're not as common anymore, but it was like the purpose was to have a very broad group of people to weigh in on certain matters. And you still see them in international boards and things like that sometimes. For Camden, I feel that the Budget Committee, the way it is, as wrought with problems as it is, and as sort of painful as it can be to sit through all of those meetings, it has served us really well. I think it's kind of if you look at the select board members that we've had, we've already talked about, it's hard to get people to do it. It's hard to get people involved in town government. It's hard to get people to understand what they're voting on. We're sticking, if this charter is going to have us stick with a legislative body that depends on the people to understand and to vote on things and to be informed, we already know that we have a little bit of a problem with that. The Budget Committee forces new people on to get involved in town government. And it's that, I'm involved in town government really today because somebody said, you should really go to the town meeting. And it was one of those situations like you talk about, Deb, where there weren't enough people and everybody looks around and says, well, who can do it? And Leonard Lookner said, I see somebody in the audience I think can do it. And that's how I got on the Budget Committee. And I learned tons of stuff. It's the first year I was on, Kate Bates was on there, and Frank Stearns, and all these people, a really eclectic group. And it took us 7 meetings to get through it, and everybody has sort of like a hell story a little bit of the Budget Committee, but it's really representative of sort of what town government can be like. Being involved in town government is very, very frustrating. You have to have some endurance. You have to sit through things that you think are boring. And I think the fact that a lot of the time it's like you look for the usual suspects, the usual people that will sign up and fill out a committee interest form, and the fact that the number is so high for the Budget Committee, it forces people to say, it's not like, well, he's an expert in budget, so we're going to put him on the Budget Committee. That's not the purpose of it. It forces everybody to say, we'll basically take whoever we can get. And we have a very competent town, the idea is that we have a competent town manager, we have a finance director, we have department heads. I think the purpose of the Budget Committee is a lot less about developing the perfect budget as it is about introducing people to the form of town government that we have and the process and how it all works. If we needed to depend on the Budget Committee to be double checking interest rates and all of this stuff, if the nitty gritty of the Budget Committee came down to like the quality of the budget, then we'd be in trouble. We have professional staff. The importance of the Budget Committee is so that, it's that like democracy in its purest form kind of thing, where you can go down there, and if the thing that bothers you is that you don't think the town is getting a good deal on pens, you're on TV, and you're allowed to raise your hand and say, I don't think this is right, and this is my little gripe, and you have to show me the documents, and it's this kind of exercise in transparency. And yes, it's messy, but it kind of forces new people into it, and I think that if we lose that, if we go to this thing where we want to let people, and then to let people continue to serve, to say that we're going to make the group smaller and we're going to let people continue to serve longer, how else are we going to kind of force new people into this system that we've decided to stick with? And I think we've gotten some of our best people. I mean, look at Sophie, for example. Right now, she's our new select board member. And I don't think she agrees with me on this issue, actually. But we needed people on the budget committee, and everybody racks their brains who could do it and begs, and we got Sophie, and she's awesome, and she paid attention a bunch, and I don't know. I think the budget committee is as problematic as it is. It's been a very good thing for Camden in its current form, and I would very much hesitate to change that. Thanks for listening.
Well, Mark?
In a similar way to what Allison says, I have a different perspective on it, but sort of the same. I look at the founding of this country, and the founders planned the House of Representatives and the Senate. And the Senate was a few members, 2 from each state. And the House of Representatives, I think, is like 605 members. 435, that's right. So there's a big body that really goes through everything, brings a lot of opinion. Then the Senate is the smaller body that takes that information and works with it. And that's sort of the way I see the Budget Committee and the Select Board. The Select Board is the Senate. It's 5 members. It's a we have those 5 members can make all the decisions. But by having a larger Budget Committee, that is our House of Representatives. That's where we get feedback from the town. If you have a smaller group of people, you tend to cut off maybe points of view that we may not see otherwise. And I think that's important sometimes, to have a lot of people coming, and like Allison said, new people, different points of view, because I always, the Select Board always sits through it, and I always learn something from the questions that are asked. And that's really important. It's getting feedback from the public. And it's one of the best ways to get feedback on the budget from the public, because there are a lot of people there, and it's not just, there's diverse opinions, and that's really important.
Thank you. Karen, you want to say something? I know that Lowry's going to respond on this section.
I agree with Allison on this. I served on the Budget Committee for 11 years. There was a woman on the committee who, woman in town who wanted to run for Select Board, and I said, I suggest you run for the Budget Committee first, because then the learning curve isn't quite so steep. She was on the Budget Committee 2 years, and she said, I will never run for the Select Board. I do believe that the larger group is really good. The 11 years I was on there, I think only one time were we not able to make a quorum. Getting people to serve, I've done that too. I go down to Hannaford and stand outside and say, come on, sign up. It's not as difficult as we're making it sound in this group. It's difficult, yes, absolutely difficult. The other thing I remember is when I served on the Budget Committee, it was maximum of 3 3-year terms, and then you had to drop off for a year. That's how I wound up being on as long as I was. It wasn't a 3-year term and you're out. It was 3 3-year terms and you're out. That was a long time ago.
Oh, it was a long time ago.
Long time ago. Okay. And I don't know when that changed, but just wanted to say I agree that the larger committee, I'm more comfortable with that.
I think I'd like to see something in between. Having been on the committee, having chaired the committee, number one, there were people who just never showed, which is always a problem. Number two, there were people that never participated, so you didn't even know what they were thinking or what they thought about the budget. So I think maybe it's a matter of numbers, having maybe 9 is not the right number.
Oh, 11.
11, I'm sorry. It's not the right number, but I really don't think 22 is either, 23. It's just too many people.
Mark, you want to say something then? Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I have some different issues with the Budget Committee. I served on it twice, once for 1 year because I took the place of someone's term and was told that I was term limited out after only serving 1 year because I was serving the remainder of somebody's 3-year term. The second time was for 2 years, and I was told I was term limited out because I was serving the remainder of somebody's 3-year term. So that was part of the issue of people not being bailed. Both times I was willing to come back on. Both times I was on the committee, we had an issue meeting a quorum. We had several meetings of those 4 meetings where, let me see, a quorum of 25 is 13. And we had just 13 people at several meetings. And that was an issue. So I personally believe that the 9-member committee is fair. But my other comment about being on the Budget Committee was we had several things that were voted on by the Budget Committee that the selectmen just flat out ignored when it went to before the selectmen.
Okay, that's another
So,
issue. It's
trouble
not for-
issue.
Not for the
Okay.
charter
Yep,
discussion.
all right.
You need to take that up with the select board.
Yes. Yep.
Lowry?
I think a couple things. I'm very supportive of the language we're presenting tonight. I think that's the way to go. I think that to talk about how forcing people to be on the committee improves the democratization of the process is baloney.
Yeah.
You know, democracies don't force people to do anything. So I think that is just a worthless argument. And I think to say on one hand that we don't want to have people on the Budget Committee for 7, 8, or 9 years because that's too long, well, that's the institutional membership that you were banging the drum about, institutional memory that you were banging the drum about was so important with select board members. I think it's equally important with Budget Committee members to have people, and I have no idea when, but the current language says 3 years, see you later, thanks for being here. So I think that's very important to have that. I've been involved in a number of large committees over time, and what I've found is once the committees get bigger than maybe 10 or a dozen people, there's an awful lot of people that show up to the meetings and say, I didn't have time to prepare for this. I'm sure one of these other people had time to prepare, so I'm okay. I can just be here and skate by anyway. And I think that's a tendency that happens. And we've had other people say, 12 people show up, 13 people show up. And I don't know why those people aren't interested, but they're not. If you've got fewer people, if you've got committees that become smaller and smaller and smaller, all of a sudden the spotlight is on everybody, and they all need to be prepared. They all need to participate. And as far as getting information from lots of people, part of it is that these are open meetings. The Budget Committee meetings are open meetings. Anybody who doesn't like how the town buys pens is allowed to show up and say, I'm concerned that we're buying too many pens, we're paying the wrong price for it. They're allowed to raise that issue. So we're not shutting off participation at all by saying we're going to have a smaller committee. I think if we have a smaller committee and after a few years you look at it and we've got several people with 6 years of experience, several people with 5, several with 4, 3, 2, and a couple of new people, I think it's going to be a much more effective committee because they will understand not just the process of establishing the budget, but understand how the departments come up with costs. Why do some departments look at costs one way? Why do some departments look at costs another way? And how much can we really be involved? Because we know that in the town budget, 2/3 of it roughly goes for the schools. And then you got another chunk that goes for the county operation. And then you've got another chunk that is pretty much predetermined because it's salaries and benefits. So the actual amount that the Budget Committee controls is a smaller amount than the whole town budget. And I think we need to make it more efficient. We need to acknowledge that for whatever reason, there are fewer people that want to participate in town government, a variety of committees. That's just declining. Some of it is that the population is declining. That's certainly a portion of it. Probably some of it is that people are busy with work, with other activities. They just don't have time. So I think to keep. Some are old, yeah, yeah. I mean, look,
Not looking here.
No,
Just
oh,
in
no,
general,
you're
yeah.
not looking here for old people.
but I think that to move it back down, and we discussed this for a long time in our meetings, and we finally came down and said 9 regulars, 2 alternates. And the alternates will stand in and vote for regular members. If the regular member is absent, the chairman says, okay, so-and-so is absent today, you get to vote on their behalf because you're here. But we think that ultimately you get people that are genuinely interested in this process, not people that just got kind of shoved into it. I mean, when I was put on the budget nominating committee, Roberta grabbed me and said, congratulations, there you go. You know,
That's
and
how you did it. That's how you do it at town
That's
meeting.
not a really good process for anybody to follow. And I think
have a
Roberta is very
point.
skilled at managing the town.
You want to,
Okay, yeah,
wait,
well,
wait a minute, before you, Anita, I believe that's Anita.
Sorry.
yes, there's the voice. Hi.
I am vaccinated, but Jeff isn't feeling well, so I thought I'd just
Oh,
wait.
thank you.
If you sign in, please.
Oh, my, do I have to?
Yes, you do. Need it for the public record.
This has been a really interesting discussion. I've been kind of whining about the size of the Budget Committee for a while, and then I listened to what Allison has to say, and I realized there are a lot of really good points on that side. There are so many different personalities among our townspeople as there would be anywhere. And over the years, I certainly noticed that some people like to express their opinion and are comfortable doing that, and other people really aren't comfortable with expressing their opinion. And they're just a whole range of personalities. Making a large size as it is, granted we could reduce the number, does invite people to join what might otherwise be to them an intimidating group. Let's say you're new to town, and you want to participate, but all these people on the Budget Committee, they know their stuff and they've been here forever, and who am I to say anything, you know? And I think there's a lot of that goes on, and I have heard of a number of people who have become more active in the town by serving on the Budget Committee. And gosh, I think that's a really good point. Also, the fact that the Budget Committee doesn't meet all year long. So it's one agonizing month, and
Which we've done.
it's one agonizing month, and then it's over with. So either you're in town that month or you're not, you know. But it does serve as a great introduction to town government, and as you pointed out, you learn a lot about what's going on, and you get your feet wet, and then you decide whether or not there are other things you'd like to do. So I find myself coming down on the side of keeping a large committee, maybe making it a bit smaller, like 15, but not so small as 9. Making it large enough that it's inviting or not uncomfortable for someone who otherwise would feel intimidated. And you're adding three-year terms. You can have a bunch of, you know, how long have you guys been involved in, I mean, oh my gosh, you're the old guard here.
And you are too, my dear.
That's right. We
And,
are.
but you know, it can be intimidating for someone new to join a group who knows the town like the back of their hand. So I would want to make it possible, and I have met, I think Matt Siegel, did he come through the Budget Committee in joining
I think so.
us on the planning
Right
board?
there, you could ask him if you wanted to.
Matt, weren't you on the Budget Committee before you joined the planning board?
I was on the budget committee for about 1 minute.
Oh, okay,
1 minute, and then I moved to the planning board for 4 years.
yeah.
Okay,
So anyway, look, I surprised myself.
okay, thank you very much.
My other thought that go ahead.
Go ahead.
My other thought that I had about a committee that's small assuming that because it's smaller, you're going to get attendance. Look what happened to this committee. You got your committee together, and all of a sudden, boom, 3 people were gone, just like that. Is there anything in here that tells us if we do the 9 people, and let's say 3 of them say, nah, forget it, I'm not into this, what do we do?
Select board would appoint,
They could
as they appoint.
Say
as they-
here, does it say
They'd
that?
be in Mark's position and say they wouldn't be able to serve again after 2
I
years.
don't see it here.
I think what happened with our group, Karen, is that 4 of the people that were initially members, I don't think any of us understood exactly what was going to be involved in this,
Right.
in this work, how long it would take, how many hours it would take between meetings, how many meetings, all that kind of stuff. We were really kind of unsure what direction we were going in. And those 4 people, once they heard that that's how much effort was going to take, they basically said, I'm sorry, I'd like to participate, I don't have enough time for this. The budget committee is different. It's real clear. You're going to meet from this date to that date, probably once a week, and this is how much time it's going to take. So it shouldn't be confusing
I
to
don't
somebody
think
that
it's
signs
that
up.
clear to a lot of people that sign up for the budget committee, exactly what they're getting into.
But you still got to be willing to read the material, be prepared for the meeting.
Right.
I mean, it's not as simple as just walking in there and say, okay, listen to the town manager and then the department head.
Yeah.
You got to know what you're talking about. You got to know what the questions to ask, because, you know, and recently, the budget committees have been really engaged and asked some very good questions. But at your point, I don't know how many town meetings we've gone to, and we needed 9 people to fill, and there's no names, and we're picking people. You know, we try to pick people that are involved with the town that we know put in the time, but we're always putting people on the spot. You know, I don't know how many times I've done it, and you have. we all have.
I did it to my husband, and that
Yeah.
did not go down well.
I agree to a point with Anita and Allison. Sorry, Allison. I'm getting older, my memory's going. And the more people involved, we love it. But it's just getting there, getting the people. I remember being at budget committee meetings, and they didn't have a quorum. So they had the discussion, but no votes.
Yep.
It hadn't happened a lot of time. Excuse me, but it had happened.
Yep.
So this is something we need to talk about after
Yeah,
this.
absolutely, and we can talk about this again, and I think we've talked about how do you do that? How do you generate interest? And I think that there's a role to play here for the select board. As the budget process before it begins, I think there's a role for the select board to try to let people in the community know that this is a process that's extremely important, and they can be using their select board meetings to talk about the budget process. I mean, you guys can proselytize. I mean, that is something that you have the ability to do, is to talk to people about the budget committee. It's coming up in another 2 months, and here's what the things that you do. And I mean, you can do that as the select board. So it doesn't, there are other ways of getting people interested other than blindsiding them in a town meeting. But you also raised a good point about it. Okay. So can we move on to the next section? If you have any second thoughts afterwards, we do have an email address, which is charter@camdenmaine.gov. Any additional comments or questions can be emailed to us. So if you have one more thought, it's 7:15, I would love us to move on to another topic. You can always email us.
Okay.
Town vote on the budget. An option is to change voting on the budget by secret ballot as a rule, as opposed to an open town meeting. We have done that for 2 years. We've sort of had practice at doing that. There are town meeting forms of government that actually always vote on the budget by referendum or by secret ballot. Kennebunk is one of them. They present the budget, the 7 or 8 budget categories like we vote on in open town meeting. They present each one of those on the ballot. York, on the other hand, has an 11-page ballot where they put every department on the ballot and you vote on them one by one. So there are ways of, there's, and a continuum of how to do it. We voted just on the total. I mean, that was done under the auspices of the emergency rule, and Bill gave an opinion to the select board that there are main statutes that gives the select board the power to put the budget on the warrant, even though that we traditionally have been voting on it in open town meeting. So the pro of doing that, people say that it's more democratic because there's a wider representation of people voting on what impacts their taxes. The cons could be, requires the select board to hold a final public hearing in April, which they do to put it on the ballot. It adds 1 month to the time between the budget formation and the vote. There could be changes that need to come up. And it reduces the opportunity for citizen comment and impact on individual budget categories. And it's a change from our tradition of the open meeting. There is another option, which is to add language that in the case of a declared emergency or special circumstances, it would allow the select board to place all of the town articles, including the budget, as a secret ballot. And that reference there is the section in the main state statutes. Or we could add it in section 6, which is about voting on the budget, or you could actually add it to the powers of the select board. John.
Hi. I will tell you right now, I mean, I have a problem with us voting at the public safety building on this, because we do get a larger turnout and people hopefully will pay attention and vote on it. The problem I have is the budget committee's recommendations didn't really get what you'd call on the ballot, so people knew. There was a little blurb over here that said it was a $49,000 difference, and I think it was in print about that big. So there needs to be a way that both recommendations hit the ballot. I know that could be a problem because people could vote for both, correct?
No.
No, you don't even let you vote for one.
You always vote on the higher one. That's how Kennebunk does it. It's just like.
But I'm not saying you vote for the higher one. I'm just saying is if the budget committee recommends 9 million something, and the select board recommends 10 million, the townspeople should be able to vote on the budget committee's recommendations. Because what's the sense of having a budget committee if they can't put forth their own recommendation?
Well, what you do is in Kennebunk's case, you vote yes or no on whatever the higher amount is, whether it's the select board or the budget committees. So you're voting up or down on that number. And if that number doesn't pass, then there are two more.
But then it gets into this whole thing of going back now to a traditional town meeting to talk about that one particular piece that didn't pass.
It's not as
It
cut
gets
and
messy.
dried a
It
process.
can be messy.
Yeah,
Very
it's
messy.
not as cut and dried actually sort of as the open town meeting voting on the budget, in my mind. But you could answer the question, can you vote yes on the budget committee recommendation and vote yes or vote yes on the select board recommendation?
No, you wouldn't be able to.
Your mic.
Your mic's not on.
The article has to be clear with a yes or no vote on ballot questions.
So what's the sense of having a budget committee recommendation then, if it's not going to be presented in a way that they can vote either way?
Well, the recommendation has to be on the ballot, so that will be there. So I guess the voter is informed that there was, depending on which warrant article, the way the warrant article is drafted, I mean, I suppose the select board could put forward the budget committee's recommendation in the warrant article.
That's going to happen but let's see, take Alice's point now, we have 25 people that have brought forth a budget which they worked very hard on for 5 meetings, trying to present it to the board, to the town. It didn't make it past the warrant for the 5 people of the community, and so now that's what we voted on, I'm not saying that COVID made everything different, but I'm just looking going forward,
Well, I'm not the attorney here, but one of the things that happens in town meeting, some of the rules governing how you vote on the budget, it's my understanding that you can't change and make the total budget that you're voting on in open town meeting higher than what the proposed budget is. For instance, I couldn't come in and bring in 50 people and say, I want to add $100,000 to the public safety budget, which would raise the whole total higher than that. Because the guidelines that I've read in Maine Moderator's Manual is that anybody should feel confident not to come and vote to leave town because they know the maximum amount of what's going to happen to them, whether they're there to vote or not. Do you understand what I'm saying?
And it does depend on how the warrant article is written, because some towns will not have a number. They'll just say, we're going to decide how much to raise. And then you go to town meeting and you raise whatever you raise.
But ours changed about 15 years ago. It used to be you could vote line item, and now we did it with the departments A, B through F,
The categories.
with a total at the bottom, but you could change.
It changed within, but it was
Yeah.
my understanding that you couldn't add above the total 9.8 million.
No, but I had seen it in the past where you took a department, reduced what theirs was by 5,000 and voted to move it to another department, but you couldn't go above the warrant.
Used to be too, you could say, I wanted to take 10% off that budget line, then be up to the select board to figure out where the 10% was coming from.
But that's what happens in what can happen in an open town
Correct.
meeting. If you have it purely on the ballot, then it seems to me that there is an obligation on the select board side to make sure that there's proper promulgation about what the budget is, and that the hearing, before they vote what goes on the warrant for the printed ballot to vote on the budget, that there's plenty of opportunity for input. Because we can all show up in open town meeting and raise our hand and make an amendment to a motion if we feel like we ought to reduce the cost of pens that's buried in the general administrative order, whatever it is. We can do that in open town meeting. But if it's whatever is on the ballot is what you're voting on, you don't have the opportunity to have a say at that point. You only have the opportunity to have your say at a public hearing at the select board level or coming to a budget committee meeting.
Yeah, but you still have the opportunity to vote on the totals from either committee, from the select board or the budget committee. And by charter, they're supposed to be both on the ballot.
They would have to be on a regular basis.
Right.
The
It's the
statute
charter
has
too,
to.
isn't it? Was it in the charter?
Yes, it is.
And,
But the budget committee's recommendation is also in the warrant.
right. Because we vote at town meeting for each one. We make a motion to bring forth who's ever number, the budget committee can stand up front and say, I move our number.
That's right.
And so, I mean, it happens.
Can't do that by secret ballot.
No, you cannot. You got just the number at the bottom, whatever it is.
That's why I don't like the secret ballot. Sorry.
Can you not on the secret ballot have two different articles? One budget committee recommends, another the select recommends. And hopefully people will obviously, one would think, would choose one, you're not going to choose both.
It can happen.
I see overvotes.
You know,
It could be confusing because you'd have Article 1.
They'll
Shall
read
the
it
ta-
carefully.
Shall the town vote to raise and appropriate the following sums for the following line items? And then if it's a no, I suppose you could have Article 2 that says, in the event that Article 1 fails, would you approve this amount? But it's going to be very confusing if you have alternate,
So you can say choose one.
You can't have A or B, choose one.
it's a yes or no.
a yes or no, okay.
Yeah, that could be very messy.
Yes or no?
So it is done in other towns, and other towns have a
That'd be
way of
changed,
handling
yes or
that.
no to choose one.
And if a category fails, then it goes back to the select board to try and put forward. What happens is after, like, for instance, let's say public safety, I don't mean to be picking on them, fails, then in order to keep funding, you use last year's budget to keep funding as long as necessary until you have a second vote to vote on that line item.
Right.
So there is a process. So it can become cumbersome if something is turned down. Did anybody want to talk about this? Anita, you have something you want to comment on?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I do value the open town meeting. First question is, does this mean that the town meeting altogether would not happen, in public in the Opera House type of thing? It's all by secret ballot, Is that what we're discussing,
We're not
basically?
proposing that as an option. We're proposing keeping open town meeting as it is. That is, we're just saying there are towns out there that do it this other way, where everything is on the ballot.
I guess I'm not really understanding. I thought that this proposal is to move the budget vote to a secret
No,
ballot.
we're not proposing that.
No, we want to keep it the way it is now.
I see.
But we're giving you the option to discuss.
Trying to
the
educate people that there are other ways of doing it.
I see. Okay.
No,
All right.
we are not recommending going to secret ballot.
Okay. Because through the years, I've really valued the discussions that we've had in town meeting, and I agree that there are many who don't show to town meeting, and that's regrettable, but I've found it very valuable to have discussions. Thank you.
Thanks.
Allison? Should just have a microphone back there.
So I also see the value of town meeting in many ways. I like the idea better of leaving that to the discretion of the select board, I think, because it gives the opportunity for residents to put pressure on the select board to say, we want the budget this year to go to town meeting, or we liked it going to secret ballot. I have had a very difficult time justifying to people the current way of doing it, or the way that we did it before these last.
Pandemic.
No, the opposite. Like other than the pandemic, other than the last 2 years, the town meeting, it is so restrictive for a large number of people to be able to get to town meeting, and the fact that there's no absentee option available to require that people come and be there physically in order to vote on the budget is considered like a major obstacle, because there are scheduling conflicts, there are school issues, and it does tend to, there is a certain demographic that is more available to attend a meeting like that, and a certain demographic that isn't. And it's automatically going to take the person who is the mother with children, the person that has to work. There are any number of reasons to not be, very valid reasons to not be able to come to town meeting. And the ability of a person to attend an evening meeting is sometimes an economic issue, very often an economic issue. Until you look at like this very small group of people that comes, and I just don't think, you say like, oh, well, lots of people don't want to participate in town government, and it's harder and harder to get people to participate. And that's what I hear Lowry saying. I don't believe that's true at all. More people than ever want to participate in town government, I believe, but they don't want to participate in the way that it has been structured in the past. They object to that way. They want to be able to, a lot of the time, to elect somebody that's going to make a lot of the decisions. So although I'm not certain that I would want to give up the town, I see a lot of value to that. So I don't know if I would want it in the charter that it has to be on secret ballot, or it has to be on the open town meeting. I can see value to the discussion, certainly. And I've certainly benefited from it in the past, because it's easy to manipulate public opinion. It is. It's easy to rally people to show up. When so few people participate, you can, if you know how the system works, you can influence it. And I don't know that that's always been a good thing, even though it's especially easy for me personally maybe to accomplish things through that. So I'm just telling you what I've heard from a lot of people.
That they liked voting on secret ballot.
That they liked that they liked the option to be able to, there still is the ability to vote it down. You can send a very strong message by looking and seeing, okay, if across the board the budget committee has recommended lower numbers, and I'm really feeling stressed with taxes or whatever, and you see that and you're like, wow, this is, the Budget Committee apparently had all these ideas for how to lower the budget, but the Select Board is putting this higher number in front of me. Then by all means, encourage people to vote no, vote down the Select Board budget and force that kind of awkward process to go back. And I think that that would send a very strong message. And that wouldn't be that hard for Camden residents to rally for, like, vote down the budget this year. If somebody were able to list a number of things, like the Budget Committee went through this process and the Select Board just doesn't listen and they're being irresponsible, and vote it down. I think an organized effort could probably pretty easily accomplish that. So it doesn't seem to be disenfranchising. It would just force the conversation to occur in the newspapers and in letters to the editor and in a venue where more people would have an opportunity to participate, to write, to respond, rather than that, like, town meeting kind of, like, you never know who's going to show up. And sometimes people don't do their best thinking when they're just speaking and responding and speaking and responding. Some people really feel they need to read and think and review and then decide. And so I think, just like Anita was saying, some people are really comfortable sharing their opinion in public and some people aren't. That the town meeting form of government with the budget, the way we're doing it right now, it does exclude a lot of the time the shy person who might be really thoughtful and really good at reviewing, but they don't want to come and
They're not required to speak. All they have to do is raise a card.
They are.
They're not
But
required
in order
to
to be able to influence and to think quickly it's a different type of thing. It is geared a little bit more toward the extrovert. A lot of people don't feel comfortable vote. There's a lot of business connections and different things, and people don't want to vote down something publicly. So just the privacy aspect of it, or they might not know how to request, a secret ballot at the, what's it called when you do the absentee? No, I don't think we can do absentee, but sometimes when you're at town meeting, somebody will request that it be
you vote on whether
privately or.
But people can request that, and you have a certain number of people that vote for it, yes, and then you do it written yes or no.
But just the privacy aspect alone, a lot of people really don't want to vote publicly. Just the public part of it is an obstacle for a lot of people. And
if I'll give one of my opinions on this. If you went to, and I would recommend people looking at the Kennebunk process, because I think it's quite a good way of doing it. The Select Board needs to make sure that last meeting they have in April, before they vote on what's going to get printed on the ballot, is well advertised, and a lot of people are welcome to come and speak and talk about it, because you are removing that option from them being able to do that by going to secret ballot. Whether somebody's afraid or not, I can understand that, but you are removing the option of somebody coming and standing up at town meeting and saying, I don't think we should pay $675,000 for a new fire truck. I mean,
we still have a public hearing, though, but I totally understand. It doesn't.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's not well advertised.
It doesn't carry the same weight because the public hearing, the public who's there doesn't vote. It's only the Select Board that votes. Mm-hmm. So you're taking away one of the options of how a citizen can influence the budget by it only being the Select Board that decides that goes on the warrant, and then they show up and they vote yes or no. So I'm just saying that the burden would be on the Select Board to make sure that there's a very open public process before they decide on what goes on the warrant. So it shifts the burden from the townspeople to the Select Board.
As far as having open town meeting, I don't think this town does a very good job of letting people know about town meeting. A lot of people who live in this town now have not lived here for a very long time. We've got a lot of new residents. Case in point, when I was on the Select Board, and that was a while back, we were having a discussion about something. A woman came up to the podium and she said, "What's this?" And John and I looked at it and I said, "I got this." I said, you're thinking that you are at a town hall meeting, right?
Oh,
She
yeah.
said, yes. And I said, no. And I explained to her the difference between town hall and town meeting. She had come here and lived here for about 2 years. She had come here from another state. She had no concept whatsoever about the basic process of town meeting and how absolutely wonderful it is to be able to give anybody who walks in the door that's over 18 the right to stand up there and say how they feel and what they want. I, for one, think town meeting is precious and we shouldn't let it go.
And I kind of love it too because it lends itself to a personality like mine, and it's worked well for me. But what I've seen is that for the majority of people, it doesn't seem to work that well, and people aren't as comfortable speaking publicly. And they also, a lot of the time when they've been to one town meeting, they don't actually come back. They say, well, that was a bunch of, I don't even know what I just voted on, because there's a lot of stuff but that we're getting into the budget. I mean, it's really the budget, but it's a lot of work to go through it all. And I mean, I like it too. That's why I wouldn't want I'm not totally decided about it, but I think we should probably leave it maybe a little flexible, and then you can elect people to.
The only downside of letting the select board in April decide whether it's going to be town meeting this time or secret ballot this time, are you going to cause confusion in the community of, oh, next year we're going to do town meeting form this time, but next year we're going to do secret ballot. I see having language in there that allows them in extenuating circumstances to change it, but having the ability to go back and forth, back and forth,
Yeah,
back
you
and
might
forth.
be right.
I don't know how that would work.
It's in anybody's
I think
best
it's important to
interest.
have the option
Yeah.
to do it in extenuating circumstances, whether it's COVID or something else. But,
I guess I agree with that. That's probably true. And I think the
it has to be
format.
one or the other, in my
Right.
mind.
Yeah.
The format does matter, and breaking it into categories, I do think people appreciate the ability to vote up or down the police budget, versus the, administrative budget, or that.
I'd be happy to email to anybody here who would like it, a section from the Kennebunk Town Charter that has how they do their budget process.
I've also seen town meetings where they have packed the room to overflowing, where they've had more than 500 people in that auditorium upstairs, because there's something on the budget, on the town warrant, that really tripped their trigger.
Oh, yeah, I
They
mean,
showed up and they voted, and as soon as the vote was over, the room emptied out. I've seen that happen 2 or 3 times.
oh, yeah, I mean,
I've
it's,
seen that.
But what the difference was that people knew through the media that this was going on, and they intended to be there for that issue.
it's just 500 is still
Say,
only 10%.
We
so.
don't do, well, that's all it will hold. Actually, it only holds 497, so it went over the fire code. But if we do a better job of letting people know, A, what town meeting is and how influential your vote can be or your voice can be, and making sure that people get that they understand it. Because, as I said, I don't think a lot of people do know.
I think it'll still just come down to whether there's something controversial on the warrant or not, and that they'll show up for that, and then they'll be like, oh, I guess I'm voting on the budget too. I know, we could talk about this for hours and hours.
And we don't want to.
We don't.
Because we're going to have another meeting about this in a couple of weeks. So it'll be ongoing discussion. So moving right along, emergency funding. This came up actually as a suggestion or request from the select board to give them some flexibility. And we had a number of discussions about emergency funding, which would authorize the select board after a public hearing to add additional funding in case of an emergency affecting public health, welfare, and safety. It is capped at 1.5% of the municipal budget, not including school budgets, because that would make that 1.5% huge. It does not raise taxes because it would be coming out of surplus undesignated funds. It would only be used as a last resort, and it adds flexibility for the select board to respond in an emergency. So we've had numerous discussions about this, and we say last resort because sort of the first resort that the select board has is their discretionary contingency fund. That's the first place the select board can go if they need extra funds for something. And actually, in conversations with town manager Audra Kaler, her comment was this would only be used if the contingency was gone. And there wasn't the money coming from the state for pandemic relief that the town could call on to print signs and do the plastic barriers and all of that. So that has been added as a recommendation. I don't think I have anything on the next page. Oh, yeah. So the pros is that it's capped, it doesn't raise taxes, it's the last resort, and it gives flexibility. The downside is, could it be used carelessly? And although the power to do so is not a violation of the town meeting form of government, does it cede too much power to the board? And is it necessary since the select board has a contingency fund and the town maintains a robust undesignated surplus account balance?
I think we should point out that the language in the proposed charter requires a supermajority of the select board to approve it. It has to have 4 affirmative votes, not 3. So that's, I think, one more safety step in there to make sure that it's not used in a frivolous fashion.
Any questions from the audience?
You're advising adding this.
Yes. John?
I mean, they have more than just the contingency. You certainly can freeze, well, I'm not going down that road. Now, you could freeze spending for the town, tell all department heads that that's it. You can overspend if you have to on other lines to cover the emergency, and then you go back into the budget and you start finding where you could save, and then you go to the town meeting at the end of the year and say, look, this is what and this is why. But I don't feel comfortable with giving the checkbook away. Let's put it that way. You know, I mean, it's very easy to have an emergency town meeting if you need folks to come in here and vote to allow an expenditure. But they got to explain the reason.
You need to have written findings of the emergency, which is not the select board sitting up here and saying, oh, woe is us, there's an emergency. You need to have an expert that explains why it's an emergency.
Who's the expert?
It depends on what the supposed emergency is. If there's disease, if there's tidal flooding, if there's forest fires, there could be a variety of different experts.
Oh, no, that's all right for you to say that, John. We've had this discussion, and it's good for you to continue to say what it is that troubles you about it.
Well, I mean, we're not a council, you know?
Right.
If we were a council, we'd sit up here, we'd have our awards, and people would vote, wouldn't care less what the people thought, because you're just worried about your ward district and making them happy so you get reelected, you know, and you're going to change, I mean, you can change ordinances without public opinion. A lot of things could happen. So we're not that. We're a town meeting government where at the end of the day, it's the people of the town that vote what happens in this town. And that's the way it should be. It may be 300-year-old New England tradition, but that's the way it is up here, as they say.
Does anybody else want to weigh in? Why not?
We always seem to have enough money that it doesn't concern me greatly. I don't know where this request came from. I don't think it was something we talked about on the select board as a group, but.
Actually, it came on a list of wanting some extra flexibility, and so this was, and actually was brought up by a select board, mentioned by a select board member.
I think we got to add things to that list individually, but I'm not a finance person.
I don't think it came from any of the members here tonight.
Okey doke.
There you go.
All right, that's
But
good.
it might be valid. It probably is valid. I mean, I don't
Other
know.
communities do it. I mean, I'm not saying that that's the reason we should do it, but it does exist in other town meeting form of government charters. It's not something we created out of whole cloth.
Right.
And actually, we spent a fair amount of time going back and forth with Bill Kelly because it seemed to be outside of the normal way of doing things in a town meeting form of government, that the legislative body are the voters, and they're the only ones that can, raise money, so to speak. But Bill did research with MMA, and it doesn't go against the town meeting form of government. So we've had big discussions about it, and it's good to hear input from.
The old guard.
She thought it came from Audra.
May have been, or I thought another person mentioned it specifically. Do you want to talk about the next section, which is the endowment funds and
I thought
gifts?
Jim was going to handle section
Oh, I'm
6.
sorry, you're right, you're doing the next one. Jim, you're handling this. Would you like to talk about endowment funds and gift management? I did not add everything about it, but you want to talk a bit about why that's been added?
Why has it been added?
Endowment, the section on endowment funds and gift management,
And why is it added? Why did we add that?
because it's not in the charter now.
There's nothing, the charter is silent on it now, and it's kind of like, it's always been handled that way, but that way is not really spelled out anywhere, so
Okay,
it
so-
tends to get confused.
So there you
That's an
go.
introduction for you.
Thank you.
It's a section that actually guides the town through the process of having, the beneficiary advisory committee, having a registered investment advisor. And we did talk to, Jim and Lowry, talked to our finance director. Oops.
Lost your power.
Time to go.
Did Juniper cut me off?
No, I bet it looks like.
It timed out?
Sometimes this just wiggles a little bit. Or.
It wasn't my computer going to sleep?
Yeah.
Did your computer die?
It might have just timed out.
Do you think I
we
ran
had-
out of battery power? I shouldn't have.
Section 6.
Section 7.
What if I unplug this?
Are you plugged in?
Well,
Do you see anything on your computer right now?
not at the moment.
So it must have run out of batteries.
That was, I guess this takes up a lot of battery space.
It would.
It does, it takes, I'm sorry, I didn't know I'm not plugged into power. I don't have a power cord. I didn't,
Power cord do you need?
I need the kind that's like this. Oh, wait, it's back. A miracle.
What's your battery say?
Now plug the HDMI back into the.
What does your battery?
You got it, it fell down there.
Down between your feet, Alex.
What does your battery say?
does
It doesn't say in this, it says low battery, your Mac will sleep soon unless plugged into a power outlet.
I think it's just USB-C, so that's,
Do you have a USB-C power?
It's just
And now it went
Now
dead
it went
again.
away again. No, here we
Very
go.
minimum power.
It's rebooting.
it's giving us a very slow time. Does anybody have a regular iPhone charger?
We don't have a long way to go. I know you can't see it, but your highlights that you have in your hand follows this, and I have a paper version. Do you want, is there anything you want to add about the fact that we've added this since?
No.
612?
Yeah.
There was nothing in the charter,
At all.
so we thought it was very appropriate to add.
The town is very fortunate to have people that continue to give gifts to the town, and we have endowment funds. So we're very fortunate to be in that position, and this gives guidelines for how that's to be handled.
In fact, Lowry just told me that the select board voted 5-0 to approve the ISP.
What is it, for everybody here, what is an ISP? What is an
It's
ISP?
the investment policy.
Yes.
Investment policy statement.
I can stick my feet in here for a minute.
Go ahead.
Public documents through the town were largely silent on this whole thing, on the endowments. You couldn't look at a town report and find out who was on the beneficiary committee. You couldn't look at the town report and find out who was on the endowment fund investment committee. It just was silent on it. And we felt that it's a pretty important function of the town, and as Deb says, we're fortunate to have lots of generous citizens over the years that have left lots of money to the town. And so it's just a way to acknowledge that this This is a process, and this is how things will be handled going forward.
Karen, I may be wrong, but we always had an endowment committee.
They existed, but they were never,
And it was in the thing who's who and on that committee.
Oh, but it wasn't in the charter.
it's not in the charter, not in the town report.
Wasn't in
Oh,
the
it wasn't in the charter, but what was the,
Not in the town report.
what was the problem?
So I should be okay.
Well,
It's always been run very well.
What is it, doing
and-
something
what's
funky up
the
there?
problem with not acknowledging that this is part of the town government?
Fine. I'm not gonna time to talk about it tonight.
I can, hold on, I hate to do this, let me go out.
We just lost it.
No, I'm trying to see if, what my battery says, and if it says whether it's plugged in. That one's not working. Let's try.
Is the plug
I'm not
working?
using my map. Well, does this have to be turned on?
Is the plug strip turned on?
Plug it back in, if you would. Sorry, guys, with technical issues. I can't tell whether that's on or off. I think it must be on.
It's not working.
It's not recognizing it. Is this a PC thing?
Well, I always found that committee ran pretty seamlessly.
My mouse.
I ran
got
into
two.
two issues in the time that I've been here.
Well, let's keep going as much as we can
Right.
with the
Yeah.
screen we've got.
And, okay, so you want me to stop talking?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. Both of them were women who lost their husbands, just like they were there one day and gone the next. And I was able to go to the endowment committee and say, can you pay their heat, light, and power for the next 3 months until they get their feet under them? And the committee was very responsive and very responsible in saying, yes, that's what the money's for, and we can move forward with that with no problem. The only thing I saw, and I don't know if it's still true, we have one endowment that was the Women and Children's Milk Fund. And it
Nellie
was
Hazen,
big.
Nellie.
Shane now.
This is not Shane now, right?
Were we able to go to court and say, we don't need a milk fund anymore?
I've not gone to court for that issue.
Yeah, so that money's still there for that.
You went to one of them and tried to get and have it changed, but the judge wouldn't hear it.
Please, this has got nothing to do with the charter. This has got nothing to do with the charter.
What we're actually,
Sorry, Lowry.
what we're actually doing here is we're putting something in the charter we're already doing.
Right.
It hasn't been in, we're not changing anything, really.
Right. Yes, Anita? Yes.
I wanted to ask, since I'm seeing the highlight that you're putting verbiage in, but I haven't found the actual verbiage. I was kind of quickly scrolling through, but I'm sorry I didn't do my
all right.
homework. Yeah.
It is section 6.12. If you go to the annotated draft, you'll
Okay.
find the language that's on page 20 and 21. It actually,
But
pagination is
if I-
great, but.
I will do my homework afterwards, I guess. But I wanted to ask the question about what you might have added here with regard to oversight of the funds. After our town or our region getting burned by United Midcoast Charities problem that happened a few years ago, certainly that kind of problem might happen with these funds. And I'm wondering if you've added a careful oversight
Highly unlikely.
mechanism. I know, but I'm asking about a mechanism that can assure us that that kind of disaster wouldn't happen to these
What would that
funds.
say? What would that, you propose to say?
I don't know.
We do have, a select board shall appoint a beneficiary advisors committee not to exceed 5 members. 2 shall be select board members, the town manager, the town finance director, and the general assistance manager. They shall be that's to select the beneficiaries.
That's the way it is now.
Yeah, well, we're not changing that. We're just adding it to the charter because it isn't in the charter. And it does say that the select board shall have a 3-person endowment funds committee to ensure that the endowment funds are managed in accordance with the investment policy statement. So it describes the investment policy statement. The town is to employ a registered investment advisor. And And then you have the Beneficiary Advisory Committee that determines who
Good.
gets the funds.
Sounds like it's pretty well handled, huh?
And there's specific language in the IPS that discusses how the investments are to be made, how they're to be measured. That's where the real, I think what you're looking for is in the IPS.
Yeah, okay,
It's not in the charter.
okay. Thank you.
There's also a difference between how it's invested and how it's distributed.
Right.
I don't know which one she's asking.
I think she was asking about how do you protect against something that happened to UMCC a couple of years ago when there was fraudulent activities.
Currently to them, so.
Well, that's neither here nor there. There
That's
were fraudulent activities within the fund that they've corrected, but how do we protect against that in the future?
And so,
It's not.
right, that's okay, we don't need to talk about UMCC, but that's the reason, one of the reasons to put this in the charter, so it's outlined how these gifts are being managed. So I'm very sorry that I went blank here. Article 7 is growth management, and again, this is an entirely new article, and Lowry, I'll let you.
We did a couple things with this. There, in the previous charter, there were bits and pieces about long-term planning and comprehensive plans and this, that, and the other thing, and they were kind of scattered, much like the town manager's responsibilities were scattered through the charter. So we felt that it made sense that we put it in one location. So this is putting it in one location. This is trying to coordinate the comprehensive plan. How often do we look at it? Because comprehensive plan is no longer a state requirement. So how often do we look at it? How often do we consider rewriting it? Who's responsible for doing that? And when there are recommendations that come out of the comprehensive plan for actions to be taken, how are those actions taken? So it really, the comprehensive plan committee meets, they create this, and the implementation is the responsibility of the town manager and the select board. We also added that members of the planning board must be residents of Camden, because it was never in there before. So you could live in some other town, and if you were appointed, you could be a member of the planning board. We thought it was reasonable that people on the planning board actually live in the town they're planning for. There really is no changes here other than getting the whole thing coordinated so it's real clear kind of what happens next after we do this, what then goes on. Because after going through the last comprehensive plan process, we came up with lots of recommendations and questions, but then you kind of drop that at the doorstep of some other group, and it wasn't clear who handles it from that point going forward. So we're trying to make that clearer to know how those things get handled going forward.
And it is up to the select board. They have the power to create a comprehensive plan committee, and they have the responsibility for creating a program to do implementation.
Just a quick question, when did the state drop a requirement?
Several years ago.
Oh, it's been a while.
Several
It's
years
when
ago.
the guy that ran Martin's was governor.
Oh, yes, I remember him.
LePage?
LePage. The SPO was closed.
State Planning Office no
it
longer
was closed.
existed.
We didn't need it,
Yeah.
according to our former gov.
So still, in order to be in compliance with state statute, this language is, the select board has the power to do this, not necessarily has to because of state law, but it's in here how to do it. Again, I'm sorry. And the next article is a very short one. It's Article 8, nomination and elections. The two things that we have done is we've added the exemption of the Budget Committee meeting to go through petition process because they can fill out an interest form instead. It's to simplify it. If we have somebody interested, we don't want to discourage them by making them go through that. And we are coming in compliance with the state law, which is reducing the number of signatures on a petition from 25 to 75, and that matches state law. Those are the only changes in nominations and elections. And in general provisions, Article 9, we've expanded the language a bit on conflicts. Yes, I'm sorry. Did I say that backwards?
75 to 25.
75
What
to
did I
25.
say? Thank you.
It's now going to be 20 to 25 signatures required on a petition.
Just get laid, Deb, I was gonna leave you alone.
After voters voted that down, we tried to.
Because, I know, I think, I think they were suspect, but it's come in compliance with state law. Article 9, we've expanded conflict of interest. We've expanded the language to clarify the purpose of it, which there really wasn't a description of the purpose, which is basically, public servants are here to serve the public, the community, and not themselves. Then it talks about you need to recuse, if you need to recuse yourself, you sit down in the audience. Some of what has been practiced, but we're just firming it up a bit for the charter. And then we added a section on how boards, committees, and commissions sort of organize themselves to make sure it's consistent. A chairman, a vice chairman, keeping records, filling of vacancies. So that's just trying to standardize from committee to committee the process. And Articles 10 and 11 are to be written once we've finished with our public meetings and our meetings amongst ourselves before we come up with a final draft, because you really can't talk about what transitions you need to go through until you know everything you're changing or not changing, if it impacts a committee or a board. And the final report is our wrap-up of what our process has been and what our recommendations are, and if there's a minority report, there's a group that wants to put in a minority report about a certain item, they have that ability to do that in the final report. And the final report would be the thing that really sort of triggers presentation to the select board to get it then to move forward to about a warrant. So our next public meeting is August 18th, 5:45 here in the conference room. I told you all already, and I hope the viewing audience knows, you can send any questions or comments to charter@camdenmaine.gov. There are printed copies available for review in the town office and the Camden Public Library if you don't have access to the town website. And on the town website, you go to boards and committees, the Charter Commission, and then you'll see links to the annotated draft, outline of highlights.
Deb?
Yes, sir.
We also have a meeting of our committee on the 5th of August,
Which will happen in here, so anybody's welcome to
which
come.
will be open to the public.
Absolutely, we are.
It's not necessarily a public hearing,
It's not
but
a
the
public
public is always welcome to attend our meetings.
And it's live and in person. It is Wednesday night in Camden, Maine.
What time is the 18th of August?
5:45.
Is that like this, a public hearing like this?
Well, it's the Charter Commission meeting. It's not a public hearing, but the public is welcome to come to a Charter Commission meeting. Our next public hearing is August the 18th.
18th, that's what I'm
That's
asking.
the one she's asking
Yeah,
about.
oh, I'm sorry. Put me away in a home.
5:45?
Yes.
Power up again.
Again, I apologize for the technical glitch. For those of you that are watching this on YouTube, I'm sorry. I'll bring my power cord next time.
So move to adjourn.
Is there a move? Move to adjourn. Has somebody moved to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you all so very much for coming.
Thank you.
And we need to put these babies away.
Some 9-year-old that killed.
By a tow truck. By a tow truck.
Has not, calm down. I mean, we voted to close the meeting and you may shut down live stream.
Oh, yeah, I'm working on it, but I'm just letting everybody know that they should continue to choose their words as though we were live.
Oh, okay.
And I'm sure everybody